Could the UK still stage major foreign operations? And how seriously will we be taken on the world stage? And Philip Hammond is our Sunday interview. Philip Hammond, you're about to give a £1 billion go-ahead for new nuclear reactors for a new generation of submarines for our nuclear deterrent. This means you have decided to keep Trident, haven't you?
Well, what we're going to be announcing is a commitment to the major refurbishing of the plant at Rolls-Royce in Derby, which builds these core reactors, not just for the nuclear deterrent submarines, but also for our attack submarines, the Astute-class submarines. So this is sustaining a sovereign capability in the UK and some very high-end technical skills in the UK for the next 40 or 50 years.
But it means that the Lib Dems are really wasting their time looking for alternatives to Trident, aren't they? You've made your mind up.
Well, the government's policy is very clear. We're committed to maintaining a credible nuclear deterrent, and we are placing orders now. We announced £350 million a couple of weeks ago for design phase work. We're placing orders now for the long lead items that will be necessary to deliver a successor to the Vanguard-class submarines in the late 2020s. But the actual decision to go ahead and build them won't have to be taken until 2016. And what we're doing at the moment is ordering the things that have to be ordered now to give us that option.
But in your view, is there anything credible that is an alternative to Trident?
Well, we've already done a review of options and value for money of the Trident programme, and that concluded that replacing the Vanguard submarines and continuing with Trident was the best value solution to maintaining a nuclear deterrent. But the Liberal Democrats wanted to have another look at some emerging technologies, and Nick Harvey, the Armed Forces Minister, is leading a review to look at whether there are any.
But meanwhile, you're going ahead with everything that needs to be done to replace Trident.
We're carrying on with the government's policy. We're doing everything that is in the critical path to make sure that when we get to 2016, we can make that decision and all the long lead items will have been ordered.
If you weren't making this massive investment in Trident, you wouldn't have to slash our armed forces to the smallest level for 300 years, would you?
Well, the overall defence programme consists of a number of different parts: an equipment programme, the nuclear element, and the manpower budget. The manpower budget's a very large proportion of the total military spending.
But it would be smaller if you spent this money on Trident. If you spent it on the armed forces, you wouldn't have to slash the army, would you?
And similarly, if you look back a few years, the previous government, was not spending enough on equipment for the army in Afghanistan, for protective equipment, and the money was being spent on maintaining a larger force level. What we've done is looked at how we can have a sustainable force that meets Britain's needs in the future on the basis that we must equip our armed forces properly. So whatever level of force we ultimately decide to have, we've got to be able to provide the protective equipment and the proper fighting equipment that army needs.
Let's look at what the Conservatives said before the election. This is Liam Fox to the Conservative Party conference. The only logical conclusion you can come to is that the army is already too small. We want to see the restoration of the 3 infantry battalions cut by Labour, a bigger army for a safer Britain. And then let's see what the Prime Minister said as well. He then went on to say he backed Liam Fox. I'm delighted that Liam has made his priority restoring those cuts to the army. The 3 battalions that should never have been abolished by this government. We will restore them. So why are you abolishing 5 battalions?
Well, first of all, we haven't said what the structure of the army will be. That's a work that we haven't concluded yet.
You're cutting the numbers by 20,000.
Andrew, the quotes that you're reciting here are from 2007, and I think most people will have noticed that the world is a radically different place from 2007. We've had the biggest economic crisis that we've faced since the Second World War. We've had a massive fiscal problem that has to be addressed, and indeed it was also Liam Fox that said that the fiscal crisis is one of the biggest strategic challenges facing Britain.
But regardless of the deficit, I understand the problem with the deficit, but regardless of that, if the army was too small in 2007, it's going to be way too small after you've done your cuts. I mean, that's logical, isn't it?
Well, the defence has to make a contribution to the fiscal consolidation, to getting the size of the deficit down so that we can build a sustainable economy for the future. And of course, if the question is, would I like to have a bigger army? Of course I'd like to have a bigger army. But what we are doing, and the armed forces are engaged in this process in a very mature way, is working within the resource envelope that we've got to create a force which will deliver Britain's needs in the future, be adaptable, flexible, highly mobile and deployable, and properly equipped to do the job it's asked to do. So we don't have any more of those stories that we were getting back in 2007, 2008 about troops without the kit to do the job.
Now, I understand that you've got to cut the deficit as a government, but you're not cutting the deficit in every department. What is the logic that you pour billions more into international aid while slashing the British Army by 19,000?
Well, the government made a commitment to reach the 0.7% of
You made
GDP,
a commitment to have a bigger army, Mr. Hammond.
a 0.7% of GDP target. But we also believe that intervening early to prevent conflict, to prevent the pressures that cause conflict and that cause threats to our national security is very much in our national interest. And our aid programme is being reconfigured so that it focuses on those areas where instability represents a threat to us. For example, in Pakistan, in the Horn of Africa, places where the problems that we're seeing in those countries have a direct security impact.
I understand that. I'm glad you...
So it's an important part of our security.
Well, you say that. I'm glad
strategy.
you mentioned Pakistan, because the fact is we are cutting back our military substantially, but we're giving aid to countries like Pakistan and India with massive and expanding military machines. What is the logic of that?
Well, our aid programme to India is being reduced. It's now very concentrated.
Well, you're giving 280 million this year, 280 million next year, 280 million in 2014, 15. You're giving money to countries with huge military machines, and yet you're cutting our own military.
In the case of India, it's an aid programme that is running down, and it's focused in one area of the country on non-governmental organisations with a primary focus in education. In the case of Pakistan, the threat to the UK's future security from instability in Pakistan is very significant, and seeking to intervene to help to stabilise the situation in Pakistan, particularly again in the area of education, poverty eradication, is critically important to the UK's security. We also, incidentally, have a very significant programme of military cooperation with Pakistan, helping the Pakistanis to deal with the terrorist threat that they face internally.
Could we ever mount another Iraq war?
Certainly not on our own. We would expect...
but even making a major contribution.
Well, yes, we will be able to make a major contribution as an ally in a broad-based alliance to carry out a major sustained operation.
We had 53,000 men last time. We couldn't do that this time.
We wouldn't be able to put 53,000 men into an operation like
300
that, but
tanks?
we would still be able, not 300 tanks either, but we will still be able to make a major contribution to a cross-alliance operation.
The Americans don't think so. You talk to Washington, so do I. They don't think we could make a major contribution anymore. We could do intelligence, we could do special forces, but other than that, they don't need us.
Well, I don't think that's true at all. The Americans are generally very complimentary about the quality of UK forces and the contribution that we deliver to a combined operation. But look, we have forces much smaller than the American forces. America spends nearly half of all the world's defence spending. It is overwhelmingly the largest military force on the face of the planet. We're not comparing ourselves with the Americans, but our forces, even after the changes announced in the SDSR 2010, will be, after the Americans, among the most effective, deployable military forces in the world.
Well, let's look at Syria. If a decision was made by the UN, for example, or NATO, to enforce a no-fly zone, what capabilities, what resources could we contribute?
Well, the UK has a fast jet capability, Tornadoes and Typhoon aircraft. We have
no aircraft carriers.
We don't. Well, we won't need an aircraft carrier for Syria. We have an airbase in Cyprus, which would give us the capability to mount any operations in the Eastern Mediterranean that we wanted to mount.
Part of your strategy involves cutting full-time troops, replacing them with the reservists. This is what the UK National Defence Association had to say. Any further widening of the role of the Territorial Army should not be at the expense of the regulars, cannot be seen as a substitute for an adequately resourced regular army. The experts don't think you can compensate for your cuts in the regular forces by boosting the reservists.
Well, frankly, the experts are in the British Army, and they do think that the Territorial Army can play a much more significant role. Under the last government, training budgets for the territorials were cut, so that we broke the covenant, essentially, between the TA and the reservists who joined up to it. They didn't get the training that they were promised and that they needed. What we have done is committed a ring-fence budget, £1.8 billion over 10 years, to provide the kit and the training that TA reservists need to make them an effective force. They will be integrated more effectively into the regular army. It's already been talked about, the much closer linking of TA units with regular units so they can train together and work up their skills together. And we do believe that the TA can provide a significant additional support, particularly in a sustained operation. You talked about Iraq, but the operation in Afghanistan. And in future, if we do get involved in a sustained operation again, as we get into the second and third year, we will start to see bigger proportions of reservists being involved.
There are a lot of famous regiments, battalion names are on the line in your cuts. Can you give us a guarantee that when it comes to announcing them, that the historic Scottish regiments will bear just as much of the brunt as the English ones?
Well, the work that's going on now in preparation for an announcement of the future structure of the Army is focused on looking at how to distribute the reductions in manpower across the infantry in particular.
So what's the answer to my question?
In a way that is fair, equitable, and based on military logic and the needs of the military going forward.
So will it be the English regiments bearing the brunt or the Scottish ones?
I'm not going to preempt any announcement at this stage, but I can tell you that the way it's done will be demonstrably fair, and we will make sure.
So it will include Scottish regiments?
The way it is delivered will be demonstrably fair, so that people in the Army, people in the wider community see it as fair and based on proper logical analysis, not just something that we've whipped up on the back of an envelope.
Your defence spending, you assume it starts to rise again by about 1% in real terms after 2015. But the Chancellor's now told us there have to be more public spending cuts in 2016 and 2017. Has defence been exempted?
Well, the 1% increase after 2015 is only on the equipment programme. Our budget has been built on the assumption, which is agreed with the Treasury, that there will be a 1% increase in the equipment purchase and support.
So whatever cuts happen elsewhere, you'll get that extra 1%?
That is the commitment that's been made to us by the Treasury as planning assumption. So far.
Philip Hammond, thank you very much. Could the UK still stage major foreign operations? And how seriously will we be taken on the world stage? And Philip Hammond is our Sunday interview. Philip Hammond, you're about to give a £1 billion go-ahead for new nuclear reactors for a new generation of submarines for our nuclear deterrent.
40 or 50 years.
But it means that the Lib Dems are really wasting their time looking for alternatives to Trident, aren't they? You've made your mind up.
Well, the government's policy is very clear. We're committed to maintaining a credible nuclear deterrent. And we are placing orders now. We announced £350 million a couple of weeks ago for design phase work. We're placing orders now for the long lead items that will be necessary to deliver a successor to the banks, and continuing with Trident was the best value solution to maintaining a nuclear deterrent. But the Liberal Democrats wanted to have another look at some emerging technologies. And Nick Harvey, the Armed Forces Minister, is leading a review to look at whether there are any.
But meanwhile, you're going ahead with everything that needs to be done to replace Trident.
We're carrying on with the government's policy. We're doing everything that is in the critical path to make sure that when we get to 2016, we can make that decision.
This means you have decided to keep Trident, haven't you?
Well, what we're going to be announcing is a commitment to the major refurbishing of the plant at Rolls-Royce in Derby, which builds these core reactors, not just for the nuclear deterrent submarines, but also for our attack submarines, the Astute class submarines. So this is sustaining a sovereign capability in the UK and some very high-end technical skills in the UK for the next Vanguard class submarines in the late 2020s. But the actual decision to go ahead and build them won't have to be taken until 2016, and what we're doing at the moment is ordering the things that have to be ordered now to give us that option.
But in your view, is there anything credible that is an alternative to Trident?
Well, we've already done a review of options and value for money of the Trident programme, and that concluded that replacing the Vanguard submarines